Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching our YouTube channel, I'm your political host, Will Wright, and your eyes do not deceive you. That is not Pastor Josh Bertram. That is my good friend and fellow podcaster, Corey Nathan, here with us today. He's the host of the Talking Politics and Religion podcast, an excellent podcast. If you haven't subscribed.
Don't forget the without killing each other part.
Or without killing each other, definitely is the important part. So, hey, good to see you, Corey.
You too, man. It's great to hang out with you. We got to do this in person really, like, soon. ASAP. Stat.
I know. For reals. Yeah, I mean, if only you weren't in, you know, the devil's armpit in California. You know,
how far away from DC are you?
I am, depending on the time of the day, I can get to DC in about 2.5 hours. No traffic.
You know, maybe so next time I'm in DC, I could kind of plan a day, meet in between, or maybe go over to Denver Riggleman's his wife's. You know, they have the distillery, the Virginia distillery. So maybe we'll do an outing out there or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, actually, I would love to just meet at, you know, one of Trump's wineries.
I just threw up in my mouth.
Like, maybe we could record an episode from one of Trump's wineries. That would be almost like a dream come true for me. Why, I have no idea. But
you're killing me, man. You're absolutely killing me.
But yeah, so you are here today, and we are recording this at least for Faithful Politics as a special episode, just to kind of recap the debate that everybody just saw. And I know that you and I, when we were talking about recording an episode like this, you suggested that we do it right after the debate. I'm glad we didn't, because it was like 11 o'clock my time.
Yeah.
That is the one thing I miss about living on the West Coast, is you all get stuff when there's sunlight out still, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you don't even know how good you have it.
Yeah, Super Bowls, debates, conventions. Yeah, there's definitely benefits to being in the right time zone.
Comic-Cons.
That's right.
So I'm glad you're here. I'm looking forward to this. Hopefully we've gotten all the vibes out. So a lot of the stuff that I think we're going to end up talking about is actually, like, tangible, objective, not, you know, how you're sort of feeling, you know, whatever. But maybe that is actually probably a good place to start. Like, so give me your big takeaways, general impressions of the debate we watched.
So one of the challenges is to remember what my thoughts were going into the debate, what I thought both candidates needed to do, who they were actually addressing, remember what my thoughts were during the debate, and then to keep that distinct from the various analyses that I read and that I see. I do try to get a diversified portfolio of analysis. Like, I was flipping over to the Fox News feed post-debate, quickly went into the Sean Hannity feed, or the Sean Hannity show. You know, so I was trying to get as much of that as possible, along with CNN. I didn't get MSNBC, but I got CNN, ABC, and then today reading, you know, the stuff that I gravitate to is like a lot of the Bulwark guys, a lot of the Dispatch guys, because they're lifelong conservatives that are, you know, they're not pro-Trump conservatives. So that's where I tend to gravitate. But again, part of the challenge is to keep what my initial impressions were distinct from the analysis. And inevitably, some of that's going to leak through. But I'll tell you, during the debate, my impression was that the first 10 minutes or so, the first impression I got was the handshake. The first note that I wrote down was like totally ninja move on her part to go in for the handshake, because it struck me as like she was setting the tone, and the tone was, "Hello, young man. I know you're a toddler, but this is what grownups do when they say hello to each other." You know, so it was like, and she wasn't going to have him setting the tone or, you know, any formalities or lack of formalities. She was determined to do that. So that was my first impression. When the conversation started, I got the sense that he exactly what we would have expected, that she was very well prepared. Although I appreciated how she mixed in stories and connecting it to her own personal story, as well as enough policy without getting into the weeds. However, I did note that she did not quite get her footing. For example, I noticed that a couple times it seemed like she had dry mouth. But she's on the biggest stage. There's a lot. I mean, the entire world is on the line, So I could understand why somebody might be a bit nervous there. But it's fair to say that she came off well, professional, prepared, ready for the stakes in front of her. And he was doing his thing, exactly what we would have expected. Freewheeling, improvising, not much substance, getting into the name calling right out of the gate. But I did get some immediate impressions from the visual, because at points I did turn the sound down. So I was like, what does this look like with the sound down? And he was not dominating that screen the way he has in other debates, whether it was the Republican primaries in 2016 or other presidential debates. He was not dominating that screen. In fact, he looked old, especially next to her. He did not look like he was dominating her in terms of size. One of the things I heard is that she's considerably shorter than he is. Even when she went in for the handshake, that was not clear. Maybe she was wearing the right size heels or something, but her presence was a strong presence. But as soon as she went in for the first hit, which was, I think she tried she took a couple of swings early on, but the first one that really landed is when she said, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to encourage everyone to go to a Trump rally. And she talked about the crowd sizes and how people got bored and started leaving. From then on the rest of the debate, Trump was in a descent that he could not recover from. He took the bait, hook, line, and sinker, and he just did not recover. Like the most frequent note that I wrote was, he's yelling. He's still yelling. He's still, he yelled the entire time. And by the second half of the debate, it even looked like he was foaming at the mouth, sweating by the end of it, hunched over. It just made him look worse and worse. And from a content substance standpoint, he didn't do himself any favors whatsoever. Now, his supporters saw exactly what they wanted to see. They saw Donald Trump, he's fighting for us. They saw what they wanted to see, because it takes a lot of, pretending, cognitive dissonance, ignoring the obvious in order to see what you want to see with him, and not see what you don't want to see. So not to disparage a lot of folks who might be tuning in that are Trump supporters, but it just takes a lot of effort not to see what's not, convenient to see with Donald Trump. But it was clear to me that to use Chris, what's his name? Chris Wallace's analogy, she pitched a shut. She didn't pitch a no-hitter, but she pitched a shutout. And if you've ever watched baseball, a pitcher pitch a shutout, that means usually a lot of times the pitcher's finding his footing in the first inning or two. He gives up a hit, gives up a walk, has to work through a touch and go inning here and there. But the rest of the way, once she found her footing, she was just nailing him time and time and time again. So that's a long way around the barn, but I think she did what she needed to do, because ultimately a huge percentage of the population is already locked in. It's a big Rorschach test. So whether it's 90%, 95%, 98%, huge percent of the population, Rorschach test. They're going to see what they want to see. It's confirmation bias. But there is the important part of the population, which she needed to do, certainly firm up her base and look presidential, but she needed to speak to folks who are not like us, who don't tune in, except every once in a while for things like this. 60 million people tuned in to broadcast television. We don't know how many millions of people tuned in on various streaming and digital options. So this is the time that people in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, who are either, I don't think there are true swing voters as much as in past elections, like the Obama Romney 2012 election. But I do think that there are voters who either haven't made up their mind whether they're going to vote, or if they're kind of leaning towards voting and trying to make up their mind not to vote. So what she did, and what I think is helpful for her, even in the margins, is she excited a lot of people and gave people who are thinking about her reason to say, oh, I feel a lot better about her now than I did 90 minutes ago. Or folks that saw Trump and maybe were leaning towards him. Because I've known these folks. Bucks County, Pennsylvania, one of my favorite places in the world. I still have very dear friends there. They are one of those constituencies that Mike Madrid talks about all the time. College-educated suburban women. And a couple of those folks, the last time I saw them was 2 days after the Biden debate. And they were despondent. None of them were saying they could vote for Biden. One of them was even, after the shooting, after the assassination attempt, one was even saying, wow, I like the fight in that guy. I might even vote for him. I think that entire circle of people, about 12 people that I know, that fits into that description, in Bucks County, a swing, region, it's exactly the opposite now. So anyway, sorry to filibuster on you, but those are my impressions.
No, it's really good. It's good to hear other people's thoughts about the debate I saw, because it kind of helps. It helps put my own, opinions and thoughts about the debate into perspective, because I'm sure, just like yourself, you probably have a lot of friends, family members that are reaching out and be like, okay, so what did I watch and was it good? Or you got the folks that be like, dang, Trump just like ran all over Harris, or other people, Harris just ran all over Trump. And I don't know, like I'm kind of in the latter camp. I actually think that Harris did what she was supposed to do, and I'm somewhat cautious, or I should say, I was cautious going into it because, I've been hurt before, so I had pretty low expectations about, what she was going to do, because I do remember her during the primaries, and she did all right. I mean, out of all the people that she was competing against, she wasn't necessarily my top choice. I thought Pete Buttigieg would have done a much better job, but
he would have been my top choice out of that field. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where I wasn't really quite sure what to expect. I mean, given sort of the previous 8 weeks, she's had a pretty fantastic, near flawless run with fundraising, campaigning. She's, doing all the things she's supposed to be doing, going to Georgia, all that stuff. So, it doesn't surprise me that she did well last night, but I definitely went into it with a little trepidation, because I just really wasn't quite sure. And I will say that I agree with you. The handshake was the thing that really caught my attention when she first. I mean, she was exuding a lot of like strong alpha K hive energy, and putting her hand out and saying like, let's have a good debate. Yeah. And Trump, who's a business person who is probably shaking more hands than you can count, understands the significance of being sort of the alpha in a business deal or a negotiation. Like, if you go into that thing and you're a little bit like timid, you're going to be eaten alive. And I think that's kind of what she saw. So, big, impressions. I think Harris nailed it. I think she has set herself up pretty good. The polls on who won, I think, will obviously depend on where you're getting your news source from. Trump posted something on his Truth Social account about, it was like 92% and 8%. Like 92%, the people thought that I won, and whatever thought that Kamala lost, and it was like a Newsmax flash poll kind of thing. Right. But I'm just like, hey, dude, like whatever you need to do to come to terms with the kind of night that you had, you do you. Mental health is really important in this country, and we should encourage people to seek it. So yeah. Key takeaways. What are some moments for you that you think really stood out above kind of all the other stuff?
They're eating the dogs.
Yes,
that was the moment where I'm like, oh, okay. So the people that I'm talking about that are the ones that a smart politician understands that they really need to be talking to. The folks that aren't extremely online, aren't, watching this stuff and watching 6 hours of news, NBC, MSNBC, Newsmax, or whatever their favorite channel is every day. Like, even my brother. My brother's a really well-read guy, but he's like, what in the world is that dude talking about? Like, eating like, what is he eating pets? And he posted something after the debate. He's like, reporting myself and my dog safe, from whatever dog eating, pet eating, monsters are out there. So that was the moment where I was like, oh, yeah, he's off the rails now, and there's no getting him back. So I thought that was a key moment. Again, I think the moment that really started to set the tone was the handshake. But when she set that first big trap that he took, that when she baited him with the crowd sizes, it was a big moment for her too when he went to their eating the dogs, because it's when her training and all of that experience as a prosecutor came out, where she understood that the jury is always looking at her. She understood that there was going to be a nonstop split screen. So her willingness to stare him straight down, but not in a it didn't strike me, the way that she was looking at him didn't strike me as a put on of sorts, or like, like a really bad actor in a Western movie in a gunfight. It struck me as, oh, cats and dogs being eaten. Do tell, like sort of bemused.
True.
And at times, like, kind of worried. When you see somebody really losing it, like, I don't really care about you, really, but like, just from a human perspective, you okay, dude? So she had somewhere between bemused and you okay, dude. But then her ability to go straight to camera and talk to the American people in so many different moments, and not just in demeanor and where she was looking, but in her message. Like, hey, here's where the rubber meets the road. When she first opened and she said, you're going to hear a lot of lies. So she was able to go back and reference her setting the stage. So that was that was a key moment, I think, that a lot of the rest of the debate hinged upon.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's interesting about that moment that you mentioned was, it was the dog cat eating comment was in response, or in the crowd size comment was in response to a question about immigration,
right?
Because there's more than a couple of topics, but the primary topics that I think the moderators try to get the candidates to talk about started with like abortion, immigration. They talk about like the insurrection, Israel, Hamas, Ukraine war, Afghanistan, racial identity, Obamacare, climate change. Those are
right.
like the ones that I jotted down. So in my mind, I think like this is how you can tell that Trump did not prepare, because immigration should have been Harris's weakest like area, and if there was any sort of preparedness, Trump should have at least just had a canned response when the moderators start talking about immigration, and just go off, hey, the flip-flopping, how come you haven't visited the border, all the
those were layups for him.
Yeah, and if he was smart, he would have found a way to incorporate the SAVE Act into the conversation, because I guess it got pulled today, but like the Congress is meeting to try to fund the government for next year, and they were going to attach the SAVE Act passing as part of a CR. It got pulled because apparently there weren't enough people supporting it, but it's like what an open opportunity for him to lay it on, daylight some of the stuff that is really, really weak for Harris. And he just completely botched it.
Yeah. I thought another key moment, the one that I wrote down as the best line so far, she said Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people, and clearly he's having a hard time processing that. And then she went into a whole set of arguments, including world leaders. And his response was, no, world leaders love me. And who did he bring up? Viktor Orban. I'm like, dude, you might want to bring up our allies and not authoritarians. Like, you're kind of making her point for her, So I thought that was another critical distinction for folks, again, like a lot of folks might not, again, we have to keep in mind that part of the reason to do this debate are for folks like us who are really plugged in, and this is, for me, it's a job, so I'm reading a lot, but for most normal folks that are sane, they might catch a news program once a week, maybe catch, 15 minutes of news on the way into work or after they drop the kids off at soccer practice or something. But like, that's it. So he should be talking to them. So I don't know if something like that lands the way it landed with me for normal people. But I did think it was significant. But her line leading into that, regardless of how plugged in folks are, does make a lot of sense, because anybody can see just in passing how unhinged this old man is. So for her to say Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people, and clearly he's having a hard time processing that. So it elicits the sense of pity, even.
Yeah. How do you think the moderators did?
So I had a very different impression than what Trump and his supporters seem to be claiming today. What I noted was that every time that he wanted to filibuster, they turned his mic back on and they let him talk, seemingly without a timer.
Yeah.
She had no problem just letting it go most of the time. There was 2 times, I think, that she did want to rebut what was said, and they just did not allow her to reply. Now, I thought that was okay, because I didn't think whatever she was going to say, it wasn't going to move the needle one way or the other, and she was perfectly nimble enough to move on to the next thing. So to me, that wasn't a big deal. But for that, because like I said, I was tuning into Hannity as well. One of the first things he said, it was 3-on-1. I'm like, dude, if you're complaining about the refs, you have lost the debate. You've lost the debate if you're complaining about the refs. So, yeah, that was I thought that they did a fine job. I thought in terms of the fact checking, I thought that they were fairly restrained, because if you spent the entire time as a moderator fact checking with Donald Trump, you wouldn't get past the first question, because he's so, I don't know if you can call it talented. He's so talented at fitting so many lies within any 15-second segment, right? But I thought I think it was 3 times total that they did a fine job of a 5-second. The sheriff or what have you in that town in Ohio has no credible evidence of dogs being eaten. I think there was one about January 6th, so there was 2, maybe 3 where they pushed back on him. The complaint is, he didn't correct her. Like, that's because there were a couple places where I think if you wanted to get in the weeds and say that she fudged, like bringing up find people on both sides, right? So, and you're aware of it. If you look at the rest of his talk, he did try to clean that up within the same speech, that he wasn't talking about the neo-Nazis. So they could have done that, but I don't know. That doesn't seem as significant as, like, there's no credible evidence of 2020's election being stolen,
Yeah.
And the frequency and the volume of his lies. Like, they had to do it 2 or 3 times. I think they picked their spot very, very well. They did it in such a way where it didn't take up too much time.
Yeah, I agree. I think the moderators did the best they could with what they had, and their choice not to fact check every single item was probably a good move in the sense of you can spend a lot of time on the nuance and turn that fact check into basically just the question or the topic, So like with the, both sides thing, I actually posted something on social media just today about like, hey, like I think a lot of people think Trump's a racist and definitely doesn't hate the fact that white supremacists like him. But on this particular issue, like he did actually say, yeah, like white nationalists are bad people or whatever. So, so it's okay, like point for Trump, fine. But I got the sense from the moderators though that they were fair, but they were definitely softer on Harris. Like I don't necessarily think that they were attacking Trump. I actually think they gave him some pretty good softballs that any gifted speaker, politician, what have you, would easily be able to capitalize on that. But I don't think they were going after Harris, or at least holding her accountable in the same way they were Trump. And there's a few things that really kind of caught my attention. Like, they could have pressed Harris more about her position changes on certain issues. I know for me personally, I was kind of looking forward to hearing what she had to say. I've seen her try to answer that before, and there really hasn't been any, good answer to it. I mean, even if she had said, hey, like, look, I had these views when I was a progressive in California. I want to be the president for all of America. And I realized that my current views weren't compatible with where everybody is politically in the country. Like if she said that, I'd be like, hey, that's a great answer. Like, yeah, I can stand behind that, because when it comes to like fracking and all the other sort of issues that she's talked about. The other one was they had asked her. It was when they were talking about Ukraine and Putin. The moderators asked her if she had actually met Putin, and she responded by talking about she's met with Zelensky and so on and so forth, and
whatever.
And the moderators didn't press her on it. They didn't go back and say, the question was, have you spoken to Putin? Much in the same way they did for Trump on the abortion question and like the national band. So I thought that wasn't necessarily great. And, even though I'm going to vote for Harris, but like I like to hold my politicians accountable, whether I voted for them or not. I think they should have.
I think that's fair. Actually, now that you bring it up, there's a few moments throughout where the moderators did follow up with the questions, whether it was a yes or no question that Muir followed up with, or an either or question that they pressed him on. And there were several moments, when Harris's answer was about positions that she did change on. And I think I forgot the other moderator's name. But when she asked about that very thing, and even said the framing, of course, is that your values haven't changed. And that was a moment where she didn't follow up, even though Harris said, I'm going to address every single one of those. And she really didn't. So I could see those were moments where they did follow up, even though Trump never gave the answer at those times. But they did follow up with him, whereas they didn't follow up with her. So I could see that.
Yeah, and here's kind of another observation I made that that isn't necessarily going to help me with any of my street cred on the progressive side, but like Trump, for the most part, was fairly respectful to Harris, like throughout the debate. He didn't call her a dog, or didn't like do like a woman or anything like that.
Yeah, so I saw that very differently. I don't think he was being explicitly disrespectful. I think he was acting in a way that bullies act when they are scared and intimidated. If you notice, he didn't mention her name. Not only did he not mention her name, he never looked at her. She was looking at him the entire time when he was speaking. At times when she was speaking about him, she looked over to him and addressed him directly. She said Donald Trump. She said the former president when Donald Trump was serving in the White House, or she addressed him directly. He referred to her third person, pronouns, or them, when he was referring to the administration, but certainly never looked at her. He was looking down, scowling the entire time. He could never look at her, and that's like I've seen some analyses that assess the narcissistic kind of tendencies that he shows, the neuroses that he's been displaying. That comes with those conditions. That in order for him to be kind of like his version of okay, he almost can't acknowledge her existence. Especially when he's being dominated the way he was. So I don't know. I don't mean to get too psychological on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting, because it's almost like he didn't go out of his way to insult her because he would have had to respect her as a human, kind of thing, and that respect would be shown by at least like looking, acknowledging her, and recognizing that. I don't know that she's an actual person. But I was probably referring to the way that he has talked about women, and more specifically her. Yeah. On at one of his rallies or whatever, and it is pretty surprising to see him feel pretty confident to talk about this sort of rumor that she had to sleep her way to the top of the food chain for the legal side in California, but he didn't bring any of that up. Like, he wouldn't have hesitated if Hillary were there, and from what I recall from the Hillary debates, like he went there on a number of occasions. I think there was one moment where he kind of did something. You can kind of call it disrespectful, but he did the wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Yeah. And said, like, does that sound familiar? And I actually had to sort of like look that up, because I was seeing that particular line was getting a lot of play. I was like, where's that from? Like, and it was from her debate with Mike Pence
4 years ago. It was also from a speech that she gave where Palestinian protesters or protesters that were protesting for Palestinians were at one of her speeches in Michigan, and she just stared them down. That was one of my favorite moments when I was still not completely sold, frankly, on Kamala Harris, and the way that she treated that moment was like, she's got this. She said, everybody's voice deserves to be heard. Yours certainly will be heard. Especially because she had just met with leaders of that group that was protesting. But she goes, but now I'm speaking. And she just gave that stare, that like mom stare, that like, and I was like, oh, I better behave now,
What do you think about the concept of a plan?
So again, he fell right into that trap, because she set him up to answer that much more cogently. I forget if it was a questioner or Kamala Harris, but somebody said, so you've had 9 years to come up with a plan to replace Obamacare. So what's your plan? Well, I have a concept of a plan. You really? So you have 9 years and you have a concept of a plan. I don't know. If I'm working for a client and I'm on retainer for even like 3 months, let alone a year or 9 years. And they say, well, we've been paying your retainer, so how we doing? And I said, I have a concept. That wouldn't fly, man. That just would not fly. So, yeah, I did not think that was one of his strong moments.
Yeah, that's why do you think he did not just hammer, the immigration issue, or something that he mentioned in their closing statements, which if I were him, I would have been doing it the whole time. But just, hey, you've been in the White House for 3.5 years. How come you haven't fixed all the problems that you're proposing to fix if you become president?
Right.
Like, why do you think he never went there?
So, again, easy layups that he just completely missed or never took in the first place. That the reason is that he's kind of temperamentally incapable of recognizing, of staying on point, of understanding that he had a couple of opportunities that would have been strengths for him, at least rhetorically or thematically. And we can argue about the merits of one once we look under the hood of the economy, for example. I look at the economy in a much more nuanced way than they tanked the economy. So again, setting the merits aside, but on a messaging on that level, it's a winning issue for him to hammer home. Or you're saying all these things, you've had 3.5 years to change it. Why haven't you done anything? I think it's because he was on the defensive. Once she started landing a couple of blows, and frankly, I saw this in the first debate with Biden, in the June debate with Biden, that even though what is going to be remembered historically is Biden's condition, and what ultimately led to him stepping down from the race. If you were paying attention, there were times when Biden still landed a couple of punches in that debate. One was when he referred to the World War I memorial in Western Europe, and how Trump disparages regularly, not just there, but has repeatedly disparaged veterans and soldiers and people who've given their lives to the country. That put him on his heels. And my notes at that debate was he needs to keep going there. So, because that clearly unsettled him. A lot of folks don't remember it because how can you not walk away with just this lasting impression of Biden just not being up to the task? But I think she and the folks on her team recognized that, and they prepared her for that. To land some blows just like that he couldn't not respond to. His ego wouldn't allow him not to respond to it. Small crowd sizes, your daddy gave you $400 million, things like that are the most predictable things in the world, but it's also just as predictable that he can't not respond to it. So he's spending 45 seconds talking about, my father gave me only just a fraction of that amount, and I was the best businessman in the world, and, he can't not respond to her saying, you went bankrupt 6 times, dude, So I think that's why he wasn't able to stay on task, is because he couldn't not respond to her putting out the bait and him, chomping at it,
Yeah. So policy, what new policy did you walk away from the debate learning about from either of the candidates?
I don't think there was new policy because, again, I've been trying to pay pretty close attention. So I think she has been able to reiterate and add some layers to what she's introduced from the get-go and then expounded upon in the DNC speech, in her acceptance speech. So there are certain things that I'm picking up on. For example, lethal fighting force. When she says lethal, that's something that you would have heard up until about 2015, most Republicans using the word lethal when they're talking about the military. That's not something that typically would come out of a Democrat's playbook, right? But lethal fighting force stuck with me. I think her way of talking about Israel, uncategorically saying defending Israel's right to exist, providing Israel with the tools that it needs to defend itself, while also saying it is a tragedy, is a travesty, it's an atrocity that so many Palestinian citizens have been killed in this conflict. So holding both of those, and I'm a Jew, dude. I'm Jewish. I have family in Israel. I stay in touch with over these, not just since October 7th, but they've been there since the late 70s. So this is a very, very personal issue for me. But yet, the cousins that are my age, they grew up with Palestinian neighbors. They went to played soccer with Muslim Palestinian friends. So to be able to keep both things at the same time, Israel's right to exist, Jews' right to have a home in the Middle East, as well as this can be a pluralistic society and the humanitarian side of it. So that was one that stuck out for me. But also there are a couple others. I'm really interested in hearing more. She did expound upon it a little bit, but didn't really have time to get into it, about building new homes. One of the ways that we can address the housing prices, both housing costs as well as homelessness in certain cities, build more supply. But it's also very strategic because, again, one of the key voting blocks is Latino voters. And I need to go back and read some of Mike Madrid's studies on this. But a lot of second and third generation Latino households, there is a significant percentage of households that have at least one family member that's in the home building industry. And I'm not talking about 5%, 10%. I'm talking about, if I said 80%, I don't think that's an exaggeration. So she's not only addressing a problem with a very doable solution, she's also, it's very strategic as well. So those were a few of the things that stuck out for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the debate was pretty skinny on any sort of substantive policy conversations, which, I mean, to be honest, in a 90-minute debate, like, if you really want to put people to sleep, like, talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, like where does the $50,000 tax break for new businesses come from? I mean, that caught my interest, but like that, I'm going to read a white paper about that. I'm not going to watch a debate to hear, the wonkiness of it.
Yeah, and there were a few things that I really wish they went more into. Again, immigration. I really wish they just kind of hammered that home because, and they did touch on it a little bit with regards to, hey, Senator Langford, Republican, created this bill, bipartisan bill, which would significantly help the situation at the southern border. Trump nixed it, said, yeah, I don't really like it. It'll be a bad win in an election year kind of thing. And then they threw it away, but it would be nice just to kind of hear a little bit more about, okay, so what's the plan now? Like, do we just keep pointing and saying it's Trump's fault, like, because that's only gonna get you so far.
I think I heard her say that she would sign the Langford bill or some equivalent of it on day one.
Yeah.
So I think she's still very supportive of that framework.
And the Trump really kind of missed the mark on some of the policies that he's been advocating for. And these are policies he's been advocating for in the past 2 weeks. So I wouldn't necessarily say that he's fully committed to these ideas. Within the last 2 weeks, he's changed his views on abortion a couple of times. But he's come out with some policies that when I mention them to people, they're like, oh, that's not a bad one. Like there's one about free IVF to
fertilization. I'm the best president ever for fertilization.
Yeah, and what's funny is we recently spoke to an actual IVF doctor who performs IVFs, does all kinds of stuff like that. He played a part in the bill that's currently sitting in the House to sort of restructure, help folks that are trying to have kids. It wasn't necessarily a partisan conversation, but he's like, hey, like if he could do that, great. Like that actually would help more families out there have kids. But, the whole process is already kind of screwed up because what one of the things that he had said specifically about IVF is that, some places still consider IVF elective. And his argument is, I don't think parents or would-be, wanna-be parents are waiting in line, the infertility line, by choice. So to call it elective, really does a disservice to Americans. So in his mind, he's like, hey, if you can get insurance to pay for it, like he's all for it. So I think Trump really missed an opportunity there to branch out, to widen the aperture of his base, because I think that's what he's really, really missing right now. Because I think during the debate, Trump did a really great job appealing to his base, but not anybody else outside of that.
Not anybody else.
Harris, on the other hand, I think did enough to solidify her base. That there's still going to be sort of those like factions that are not going to be happy with her policy on Israel and Palestine and whatnot. But I do think at the end of the day they'll probably end up voting for her because they're like, oh, like it's either her or Trump, so it's like it's going to be her. So Trump also recently came out and said, hey, he supports the legalization of marijuana. I think that was a Truth Social post, so take that for what it's worth. Because somewhere in that day, he also was promoting Hulk Hogan's new beer. Whatevs. But so as far as like policy, not a lot. The last thing I'll point out though, and this is kind of a part that's sort of important to me. It's an area that I try to immerse myself in, and that's just national security. When they were talking about the war in Ukraine, it's not really popular from a progressive standpoint to just be given a bunch of money to go to war and stuff like that. But I think that she sort of walked that line as best as she could. But I was surprised that Trump would not commit that Ukraine should come out the victor of whatever conflict. It seemed like that would have been a real easy win. It probably would have been what all the Reaganites would want him to say. And he tries to sort of make this argument that, Putin would have never invaded Ukraine if I were president still. It's like, dude, like he was in Ukraine when you were president.
Right.
like remember the whole reason he got impeached the first time,
Yeah.
And I think what's really, really important just for the audience to know, especially with his relationship with Putin, during his presidency, he looked at unilaterally lifting sanctions on Russia in 2017. And it was so concerning to Congress that they actually had to step in and pass a law that had a veto-proof majority to stop him from doing that. I mean, just think about that. 2017, Republicans, they own Congress,
Right.
and they had to do that.
I think the reality when it comes to especially Ukraine, number one, I think David French's assessment is correct in that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, there's a cat lady, whatever, and eating pets, and this is going to be lost except in some coffee table book of the silliest things that happened in the 2020s. But what we are going to be talking about, and that's going to be taught in history classes, is the sovereignty of a democracy in Eastern Europe going to be protected and supported by the post-World War II NATO alliance?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the only reason that Trump could say he would end that war in a day is because he would give to Putin. Number one, he would pull out all support of Ukraine, and he would basically give Ukraine to Putin. That's one way to end the war. But I think the bigger picture, though, with Trump and policy is there's no reason to talk about Trump and policy. For one reason, for one thing, what he says today is going to be completely different than what he says tomorrow. You could point to certain things that you liked that Trump did, whether it's getting Supreme Court justices appointed, if you like those. Number one, I would say those were not Trump-appointed justices. I would say that those were McConnell-appointed justices. You could say you might have liked his 2017 tax law. Those weren't that wasn't Trump's tax law. That was Paul Ryan's tax law. It looked a lot more warped than what Ryan's plan was that he'd been working on for a couple of decades. But those weren't his. He happened to be a broken clock that was sitting on the right time when it hit him in the face. But the other thing, and here's the most important thing, is if Kamala Harris loses in November, she'll concede and she'll participate in the peaceful transfer of power. If she wins, for me personally, I know, just like with a state assembly member here, I knew that I'd have 75% of the time or more that I'd disagree with her on a policy-by-policy basis. But I also knew that she was a person that would bring me into the room, especially on small business matters, and I could have a conversation with her, and we could find points of agreement. And because she was a Democrat and she knew that I was a small business conservative, I knew that with her having won the election, she'd win out most of the time. But the fact that she allowed me in that room and that conversation, and on a larger scale, I don't expect Kamala Harris to have me in the room per se, but I do feel like there's going to be policies that I disagree with, but because she's committed to the basic fundamental workings of our constitutional republic, that That's how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to have policy disagreements with her. The contrast is if Trump loses, he's not going to concede, and he's not going to participate in a peaceful transfer of power. And if that he's already saying that's what he talked about that last night. That being the case, there's no reason for us to talk about policy. That's the only policy. If we can't get to basically continuing the American experiment on one of the fundamental pillars of this democracy, there's no reason to talk about. He doesn't have policy. That's the policy. That's the only thing that we need to talk about.
Yeah, it's funny. I was telling somebody the other day that no matter who wins the election in November, Trump will claim that he won. So it's like, it doesn't really matter at this point, So it's just a matter of, will Harris say she won or will she say she lost in November? That's really the thing that you have to focus on, because Trump is going to claim victory no matter what. But so, all right, what happens next, you think?
I was going to ask you that.
Okay.
Love to, because nobody, like the real, A-listers that are on CNN, they don't like to prognosticate. But I guess because, I don't know if we're in AAA or AA or whatever, we're like semi-pro guys. Let's prognosticate, man.
Yeah, well, it's too early to really know how the polls are going to be affected at this stage. So, we don't have the Nate Silver model to kind of go off of. We got like a lot of flash polls, and we'll be looking for the focus groups. But, I think there will be another debate. The Harris campaign offered to debate again. I believe this time it's going to be on Fox, which is the same venue that Trump initially had asked for. Now, as of the time of this taping, I think he's having second thoughts.
Sure.
Framing it kind of in the context of, well, only if you lost, you're going to have a debate kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, again, like any sane person watching the debate last night will say that Trump won hands down, much in the same way that I don't think there's a lot of people watching the Biden-Trump debate saying, "Oh yeah, Biden nailed him." Like it was all over. He's the reigning champion of debates, which is something the GOP is putting out right now. And so I hope there's another debate. I'm bummed that the debate probably won't be at VSU, which is here in Virginia, Virginia State University, which is a historically black college. And it was originally going to be planned there when Biden and Trump are going to debate. So I'm kind of bummed about that. But I think if the Harris campaign is smart, they'll keep it on their calendar. And even if they have to debate an empty podium, I think that they will, because they'll just get the airtime, the free airtime. And I think after the debate, we're going to start seeing more and more surrogates come out of the woodwork to support Trump. Because I think that there was a lot of people just don't really know. I was really surprised that both Cheneys came out before the debate, to support Harris. But now after the debate, I think that we may start seeing a lot more Republicans coming out saying that, I don't know what it was that we just looked at, and how long is it before the GOP decides to have a convention where J.D. Vance is the nominee. But yeah, I definitely think that Harris is going to capitalize on this. And, she now has the Swiftie caucus. So she'll have the Tea Hive. I think I don't know what they're called, but Swifties, I guess. So who knows if that'll have an effect or not. But all we know is that Elon Musk has offered to impregnate her. So,
I think what we see next is I don't know if I'm going to be paying as close attention to polls. I am curious to see what the polls look like. Certain polls look like about a week and a half, 2 weeks from now, because that's when I think we'll start to see if there was any bounce that Kamala got from this debate. But the bounce, if we see an overall bounce of 2 points, I think that's going to be a lot. So what I am specifically looking for, if I'm going to be looking at polls, is I'm going to be looking at respected state-level polls in those swing states: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, like you know the ones, 7 states. There was one from Marquette that I think is really good for Wisconsin that gave Harris, I think, a 4-point edge. So those are the types of polls, like good, solid polls that are especially good on a state-by-state level. But in particular, I'm looking for any data that shows me about particular voting blocks, whether it's independents, undecideds, Latino voters. You know, I'm going to be looking in those crosstabs. You know, for Latino voters, for example, the numbers over the last few days, last week, have not been good for Harris. Not to say she's winning, but Trump's support is still somewhere between 36 and 41% Latino voters. Any number that's north of 35% for him in terms of Latino voters, that's not good for Harris. He needs to be low 30s, if not high 20s, and that's when it'll start to be better news for Harris. So those are the kinds of things I'm looking at. The other thing I'm looking at that it's going to be hard to measure is the ground game. I think the biggest difference, and what Harris has done since that Sunday that Biden stepped aside and then, half hour, 45 minutes later endorsed her, is her organization is just hitting it on all cylinders. And the numbers that I'm hearing, not just in terms of fundraising, because at a certain point the dollars only go so far. In terms of, for example, media buying, sorry, Charles is very excited about it. All of the inventory has there's nothing on the shelf.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, the money only goes so far. Sorry, he's so excited. So but the ground game in terms of organization and volunteers. So, for example, I heard that Kamala's campaign has dozens of offices around Pennsylvania, and Trump only has 2. My numbers might be a little bit off, but that makes a difference, because at the end of the day, this campaign isn't about turning a Trump voter into a Kamala voter, or vice versa. I just think that it's just so locked in. So what it is getting Kamala curious into Kamala voters, if she's going to win, or Trump sympathetic to, you could stay home or vote for whoever, your wife, So that's where the ground game comes in, the enthusiasm, turnout.
How important do you think the VP debates are going to be?
De minimis, because I thought going into this one that there was a 90% chance that it was not going to have any effect. I left a 10% possibility that she was going to be so strong. And I've been watching debates since junior high school, since 1984. And this is the strongest performance that I've seen in a presidential debate. I wouldn't say that Trump's performance was the weakest, because Biden, I think, arguably, objectively, was the most consequential, if you want to call it that. But her performance was top tier, if not the strongest. But the VP debate typically doesn't have that much of an impact. I don't give it as much as 10% possibility, like I did for this one, where I do think it's going to have an impact, even though it's maybe a couple of points. But it has impact on the margins because of how strong it was. I just don't think those are the politicians that Governor Walz and Senator Vance are. What Senator Vance is going to do. You know how he takes a question and answers it with 3 or 4 words, and then says what we should be talking about, and it just goes through his talking points and attacks. We know that Governor Walz is going to be Coach Walz, and he's regular guyness, but a pretty good politician at that.
Assistant coach.
Yeah. So I think we know it's a pretty good chance that we know what to expect. I just don't think that's going to have a significant, unless there's always that possibility, because we've seen, we saw what happened in June. So there is always that possibility, but it's still their VPs. I just don't think it's going to have a significant impact.
Yeah, I think because this is an election year where Trump is on the ballot, we should be open to just about anything. And I predict that Vance is going to do a lot better in the debate performance than Trump did.
Oh yeah,
and Trump is going to kick him off the ticket.
Oh, interesting.
And then RFK Jr., come here, you're going to be my new VP. So.
That's a hot take.
I'm trying to think outside the box because when we think inside the box, we always get surprised. So I don't really want to be surprised this year. But hey, thanks so much, Corey, for stopping by and chit-chatting and scratching all my little political punditry itches.
Who do you think is going to
win? The debate or the election?
The election.
Who do I think is going to win? Is this what they call a pregnant pause? It probably is.
It's like 9 months pregnant.
I'll say it. Harris is going to win, hands down.
I like her chances. Especially like after last night. I like her chances, and because of everything I'm talking about, I think it's going to be won on the ground game.
I think so.
This election's going to be won on the margins. A couple of key states are trending in her direction: Michigan, Wisconsin. Pennsylvania is a coin toss, but that's the one that's going to be won on the margins, and where I think enthusiasm and ground game is going to tip the scales. If she wins Pennsylvania, I just do not. I think this year's North Carolina is this year's Georgia. I could see him winning Georgia, but I could see her winning North Carolina.
Really? See, I would think Georgia would be more of a gettable state than North Carolina, and I only say that because number one, Trump is already doing his "hey, don't do mail voting" kind of thing. There's already 2 Democrat senators there, and it's like at this stage of the game, where you spend money is really important. Like you said about Pennsylvania, well, like they just had a rally in Georgia. Their former lieutenant governor basically has endorsed her. So I think they're expending a lot of capital in a state that, I would hope they would think is gettable, or else why spend money there? Because I don't think she's done a rally in North Carolina yet. That's just south of me. So
don't get me wrong. Georgia is definitely winnable for Harris because statewide elections have been won by Democrats, time and time and time again. I'm also watching because the strongest politician with the strongest infrastructure in Georgia is Governor Kemp. And I'm curious to see how, if you would have asked me before 2 weeks ago, I would have said he's not going to put any elbow or shoulder behind Trump's efforts there, which could significantly hamper his Trump's possibility of winning there. But now I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure how much Kemp's going to be helping him, or his political machine's going to be helping Trump. But again, we've had plenty of evidence, certainly since 2020, that Democrats can win statewide elections there. So I'm not counting it out. I'm just saying I like North Carolina because, number one, the population has changed there. The makeup of the population has changed. I also think I'm trying to pay some attention to whether the Harris organization has efforts in the western part of the state. So anyway, we're getting into the weeds now, but Pennsylvania. It's going to come down to Pennsylvania, and I like her organization in Pennsylvania.
Well, I guess we'll see, and we'll have to link up again after the VP debates. But thanks again, Corey, for everything, man.
Sounds good. Great talking to you.
Yeah, definitely. And just as if people don't know already, how can people find your show?
Oh, I appreciate that. Easiest way to find us is our website, politicsandreligion.us. It's politics and with the end spelled out, politicsandreligion.us. Or you could find me on most of the socials, Twitter and Threads and Facebook and LinkedIn, and Corey S. Nathan, Corey S as in Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Corey, and thanks to all of our audience for stopping by and listening to us talk for an hour. And as always, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.